Not often is something so easy for me to recommend as the RPK. You can call it a personal bias if you want to, because it is, but it's just a big AK, and yet that's all it needs to be classified as a support weapon at most airsoft fields, which means you get to use full auto like an M24A9 does. The only real downfalls for the standard RPK is that it is a big AK. I mean, this barrel is huge, and you really don't need that bipod. It adds weight. And if you want to add anything like a grip or a flashlight or anything else to a classic RPK, or even a sight, you're going to need to do some customization. And that's when the RPK16 busts through the door. This is going to be a fun review, because I've wanted one of these for a very long time. Ladies and gentlemen, the LCT RPK16. I asked for one of these from LCT to see if this standout piece from their catalog is really as great as I thought it was. And like always, LCT is letting me say anything I want to about it, be that good or bad. So let's check out the exterior, the interior, and talk about the performance of this new rendition of LCT's RPK16. I've been using this one in particular for 2 months now, whenever I can get a chance to get to an airsoft field. And lately, that's been quite a lot more times than usual. So you're going to see a lot of mission airsoft footage in the background. This is my home field based in San Antonio, Texas, and I would highly suggest going there if you're in the area if you want more of a chilled out gaming experience. People don't really go that hard here. I really can't wait to talk about this, as it's something that apparently breaks balancing so much that people have spread the rumor that it's banned at Milsim West. However, long story short, that was never the case. Rather, it was deemed to be unsuited for Milsim West, as it's not used much in the real world anyways. So if anything, they slammed the hammer on something that was breaking the realism factor of their event series. But moving on, we start this review where we always begin, with the unboxing. This begins with a common cardboard box with LCT's newer graphic designs dressing it up. You can use this box to carry your RPK around with the carry handle, but I'd always suggest getting a real case or bag. Opening the box, we get an LCT banner flag and the paperwork. This consists of a quality certificate to ensure that it was tested before leaving the factory. We also get 2 types of catalogs. LCT makes a lot of stuff, and they love showing it, so much so that this takes the place of any actual manual. This is a rather simple replica to understand, but I would have still liked to have seen an actual manual, or at the very least a QR code that would take you to an online manual. Moving on, under some foam, you'll get the RPK16, or as LCT calls it, the LCK16. Then there's this standard 130 round AK-12 pattern mid-cap magazine. And I'm just going to cover this real quick because I don't want to even waste my time on something like this. This is the weakest thing in this package. This feels unbelievably cheap for what I expect of LCT. I've handled every AK-12 style magazine on the market, and these feel the worst. I'm also tired of seeing flat squared magazine followers, and wish that LCT would move on to extended followers. Spoiling a bit of this review, the RPK16 I have feeds from every AK magazine that I own, so this will most likely never be used. Continuing along, there's a card to help program the included Gate Aster SE MOSFET in here that grants you access to binary fire, burst, semi-semi lockout, 4 pre-cocking levels, battery detection, and active braking functions. Then there's the famous LCT model of dog tag, and the piece of resistance, the 2,000 round plastic drum magazine. These are lovely drum mags that I tend to praise a little too much, admittingly, but they're super easy to load, get batteries into, and they just work better than any other drum mag that I've ever tested. More on that later. For now, let's look at the overall setup that we have here. Unlike the normal RPK's length of 41 inches, the RPK16 comes in at 32.5 inches long, while a standard AKM measures up to 36 inches. Yes, the RPK16 with a fully collapsed stock is shorter than a bare bones AKM. Extend the stock to its outermost point, and you'll get a 36-inch setup. Then fold the stock, and you'll finally have a 25.5-inch pocket LMG. Weight, surprisingly, wasn't too far off from the classic RPK. The drum mags are also just a smidge lighter, but despite just being an 8 or 9 pound replica, people told me that this is a heavy piece. Touching up on some history, the RPK16, with the 16 standing for 2016, the year it was developed, was, oddly enough, a bit of a flop in the real world. Sure, it replaced the RPK-74 as Russia's light support weapon, but who really cares? Even the quick change barrel system that the RPK-16 features didn't matter much to Russian troops. The PKPs and the older PKMs are still much more popular than this, despite the heavier weight. Unlike in the airsoft world, the RPK was never really used much by the Russian military. The RPK-16 was used in Syria, and some have reported seeing them in the recent Ukraine conflicts, but even then, it said that they weren't very popular with the troops. I didn't believe it myself until I started reading a bunch of articles and went looking for photos of RPKs in use. This wasn't all that necessary to begin with, so the RPK-16 was like getting an extra set of snow tires, despite already owning a barely used set that's stored in your garage in Los Angeles, California. The 95 or 96 round 545 drum magazines are freaking sick though. I'm sure that a lot of Americans, including myself, really wish that they could buy some of these. Back to the LCT replica though. For user customization, the RPK-16 has pretty much all the bases covered that an AK enthusiast would want. You get Picatinny rails up top for sights, handguard rails for bipods, grips, flashlights, and anything else, 14mm counterclockwise threads at the end of the steel barrel for tracer units, and huge suppressors, which there are many that look great on this. This new generation of LCT doesn't suffer from the same limitations as the classic RPK, or even the RPK-16 that LCT initially released, as LCT is finally embracing some quality of life updates. Because, ladies and gentlemen, LCT is finally including rotary hop-up dials. Although this may seem menial for most of the AEG techs out there, this is a huge improvement to LCT's replicas if you've ever handled or know anything about their past replicas. So I'm really happy to see this. Closing the mock bolt and looking around, this is basically just a heavier barreled AK-12, which itself is a modern AK to its core. So all the controls are how you would expect, except for the inclusion of the nice shelf on the selector switch. As for my example, the selector switch was way too stiff out of the box to really use this extension to flip the selector back and forth reliably, but setting the selector to full auto is the only thing you should have this set to anyway. The stock setup is a comfortable affair with 5 positions on the aluminum side folding buffer tube. At the very back, you get a rubber butt pad that'll grip onto your shoulder well, and on each side is a cutie sling point that'll match up well with the sling loops around the barrel. But don't confuse the mock gas tube plug as a sling point. This can be removed simply for an added layer of realism, much like how you can do with the butt pad. But neither of these features uncover anything of importance. It's simply an aesthetic feature. These holes in the handguard aren't intended to be used as sling points either. They're meant for extra rail segments that can be had for about $15 later on. Now, something that I wish would perform as intended would be the side folding locking mechanism. Mine occasionally needs some persuasion to lock the buffer tube to the left side of the receiver, and I chalk this up to a test of quality control. But if you are folding the stock over, be sure to back the stock off one position on the buffer tube so it will reliably fold over without causing any damage. And of course, this setup won't work well while using the wider drum magazines that the RPK-16 is mainly used with. Then for the most infuriating but admittingly accurate dust cover setup that hides the battery connections for this AEG. Just like any AK-12 that has ever been produced for Airsoft, the process of getting to the connectors and reassembling the top of this replica is not a quick task and may require tools to pry the crosspin out or set it back in. Or you could just hit it with a magazine over and over again, as I've been doing quite a lot. But I will say that I am happy to see Dean's connections and we can see the Gateaster tag advertising the equipment inside. As for the LCT RPK16 strengths, we have access to a relatively lightweight and short platform that can be used on full auto at most fields that classify it as the LMG that it is. Customization for an AK is good, and many of these in private hands will be seen with many different types of sights and other accessories. Exterior build quality is strong, and by all accounts of the techs that I've talked to over the course of the 4 years that LCT has offered this platform, these are easy to work on, but don't come into shops for internal work unless they're being converted to high pressure air. Weaknesses mainly come from minor things like the stock latch on my example, but the dust covers, painful removal process, and lack of space for most batteries is most definitely the biggest concern I can think of. I wouldn't even list the price point to be too substantial, as I honestly believe it to be fair, especially for the build quality, and for the inclusion of the Gateaster SE MOSFET system and 2000 round drum magazine. Take just these 2 points away from the package, and that would make the RPK itself cost around $300 to $310. And so far, it's a great contender in my eyes as one of my most capable and easy to use support replicas in my collection. But the really important stuff begins now. First, we'll look over the version 3 gearbox that's really easy to get to this time around, unlike the classic RPK. I would highly suggest this straight to the point video by Bad Guy Airsoft, as I followed his video to get to this point. So with the gearbox out, the motor immediately caught my attention with these cuts to mitigate heat. This thing gets really hot with a lot of suppressive fire, but I'd like to think that these cuts help a little bit. I love the quick spring access, but don't expect to do swaps within 10 minutes unless you get really proficient at stripping down your RPK to this point. However, the spring is a linear M120 and the guide is a 2-tab steel ball bearing model. Shimming was average, and Connor, our Airsoft teching wizard, said he would fix it to his specifications first thing if he was given the chance. Inside, the grease that LCT uses is thick and honestly a bit nasty. It really sticks to your hands, but Connor said this isn't too bad for something that'll be used mostly on full auto. We saw mostly average parts in here, like the 9mm ball bearings, the steel tooth piston with the first tooth shaved down for engagement, that came without a ball bearing in the head. The cylinder didn't feature a port, but the air nozzle did come with an O-ring. Quite surprisingly, the air seal was stellar. This is by far the best example of such a thing I've seen in an LCT, so if this is something that LCT aimed to improve on, then they definitely impressed us. Not much needed to be pointed out with the MOSFET, it's just there, being a MOSFET, but that doesn't mean I'm not happy to have it in here. Quite the contrary, as the absence of any kind of MOSFET was a big con for many of my past LCT reviews. I would like to see something else used for their hop-up buckings though, because when I see flat pressure points like this, I already expect some problems at 250 feet. At least it's an easy gearbox to put back together and back into the body, which I appreciate. At the Chronograph, with 0.2 gram BBs and an 11.1 LiPo battery, you can count this out for any average American CQB games, but something like this is meant for field anyway. Even then, it's not too ridiculous with the power outputs, at under 400 feet per second. Rate of fire was very good at 21 rounds a second, which is more than enough for me to keep people from poking their heads out of cover. And since you have a proper MOSFET inside these models, I can finally recommend using 11.1 LiPos if you want that extra kick. And just like what we saw with the steel 7.62 style drum mags, these 5.45 90 round style drums are really good at keeping up with such a rate of fire for a good amount of time before you'll need to rewind the system. And even then, after you wind it back up after a couple seconds, you can dish out another long stream of BBs if you absolutely need it. I don't know what LCT is doing with their drum mags, but these are the magazines to beat if you want to impress me. At the range with 0.28 gram BBs now, a player at 200 feet is going to be a cakewalk to hit over and over. However, in my tests, and after playing with this piece for over a dozen skirmishes over the past few months, 250 feet is not the easiest thing to pull off if you're just throwing a single or two BBs downrange.
I expect most people to be using their support weapons exclusively on full auto to guarantee getting hits at range. But even then, my lovely assistant said when he was getting hit, BBs were just patting him lightly on the back, or just falling off completely just a few feet ahead of him. 250 feet is just the extent for this LCT, it seems. So I would recommend a barrel and hop-up bucking upgrade if you want to ramp up the capabilities for your own RPK16.
So after performance, we have my conclusions. I would say that I'm impressed, but this is pretty much what I expected the RPK16 to be like, except for having a Gate Aster SE MOSFET, the rotary hop-up, and the quick change spring system. I really would have liked to see more range and accuracy out of this thing, but if I really need to shoot past 250 feet, then I'm just going to send like 30 BBs downrange to basically brute force a hit to happen. The polymer parts are really dense. You're not going to bend any of this stuff. You might nick it, but even then it's not even a big deal. The steel on this is hammer worthy, and I even had a lot of players say that this was too heavy for them, which was a bit of a surprise. Some of you guys need to get back in the gym. LCT supports this model with access to so many different parts, and the drums are easy enough for anyone to set up, and can feed hundreds of BBs with a single full wind, as we saw in my classic LCT RPK review. Keeping it brief, it's an easy to understand AK built tough with an easy to work on gearbox that's hardly ever taken in to get work done anyway. It feeds from all of my AK magazines thanks to the steel spacer in the magwell, and it has a great rate of fire in my opinion with an 11.1 LiPo. And I can take full advantage of all the options the Gate Aster SE MOSFET has to offer. As for myself personally, this is absolutely staying in my collection, and I'm going to order a few more parts. I'm going to order some side rails, more of these drum magazines guaranteed, just so I can get the full experience. And just because, well, I like this thing. I really gotta thank LCT for letting me take my time over the course of a couple months to experiment with this model. I've always liked the RPK16, and I know how much of a terror these have been at my local field, so I can say that, yeah, it's what I thought it would be. But you know me, I have to test it out for myself to make sure that that praise was warranted, and before I said anything in this review. However, do not stop at just watching this video if you are interested in the LCT RPK16. There's more videos out there covering this, and I would really like for you to go watch them before you make a final decision on something like this. But of course, when you are ready, go ahead and pick one up at EVIC using our exclusive link that you can find in the description below if you want to directly support the USAirsoft channel. Or subscribe now if you haven't already, as that always helps me out to put more content together. Also, let me know in the comments down below what you thought about this review, as I changed a little bit of the pacing around as I'm taking more and more advice and criticism from the audience. You guys have really helped me out whenever it comes to putting these videos together just the way you like them. But of course, let me know in the comments on how I did. But until that next video drops from the city of San Antonio, Texas, this has been Scott Hollenbeck, and I'll be sure to see you all next time.
So what'd you think about it so far?
It's pretty good. It's really f***ing heavy though. I mean, I've been playing for what, like 2 years now? And I'm just used to polymer. I've had a Gen 2 launcher tactical, and that's mostly polymer. And then now I've got the, the Arcturus, that's polymer. So going from polymer to full metal and then with this big ass drum, it's a change, it's a big change.